The year is 452 AD. The dawn breaks over the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire, but the rising sun brings no warmth, only a creeping, paralyzing dread that settles deep in the marrow of your bones. You are a Roman soldier, a veteran of border skirmishes and local uprisings, standing watch on fortifications that have stood for centuries. But today, the stone beneath your sandals feels fragile. It begins not with a sight, but with a sound, a low-frequency vibration that hums through the earth, shaking the dust from the mortar of the wall. At first, you tell yourself it is thunder rolling in from the north, but you know better. The sound is more like a giant, enormous beast growling in the distance.
In from the distant mountains, a summer storm brewing in the heat, but the sky above is a cruel, cloudless blue. Then the realization hits you with the force of a physical blow. It is not thunder. It is hooves. Tens of thousands of them, beating against the dry earth in a rhythmic, thundering cadence that sounds like the heartbeat of the apocalypse itself. You grip your spear, but your hands are slick with sweat, and your knuckles turn white as the horizon begins to darken. You have heard the stories whispered around the campfires, tales that the commanders dismissed as exaggeration to frighten new recruits, stories of warriors who are born in the saddle and die in the saddle, of men who drink the blood of their enemies and eat raw meat cured by the sweat of their horses. Then you see them cresting the hill, a silhouette of terror against the morning light. They are not like the Germanic tribes you have fought before. These are something else entirely. As they draw closer, you see faces that will haunt you for the brief remainder of your life. Their skulls are deliberately deformed, bound from infancy to grow into elongated alien shapes that look less like human beings and more like demons spawned from the nightmare of a fever dream. Their eyes are dark, focused, and void of any mercy, eyes that have seen cities burn and empires crumble. And leading them, riding with a terrifying, unnatural stillness, is a man who looks so ordinary that you might have passed him in a market without a second glance, until you saw the abyss in his gaze. You are about to meet Attila the Hun, and you have approximately 4 minutes to live. In the wealthy fortified city of Aquileia, the citizens woke up that morning believing they were safe behind walls that were considered impregnable, shielding them from the barbarians of the north. They were tragically, fatally wrong. When Attila's army arrived, the siege was brutal and relentless, lasting 3 months of starvation and fear. But it wasn't the siege that broke history. It was what happened after the gates fell. Attila gave an order that would echo through the centuries, a command of such total nihilism that it defies comprehension. He didn't just want the city conquered, he wanted it erased. He ordered every building to be demolished, stone by stone, every temple leveled, every home burned, and every citizen killed or enslaved. He wanted Aquileia to be wiped from the face of the earth so completely that future travelers would pass through the region and not even realize a city had once stood there. And here is the part that should make your blood run cold. He succeeded. The destruction was so absolute that the city simply ceased to exist. The few survivors, the lucky ones who managed to escape the slaughter, fled into the malaria-infested marshes and lagoons of the Adriatic coast, terrified and desperate. They waded into the mud, carrying what little they could save, and decided to build a new settlement on the water, driving wooden piles into the silt to create islands where the Hunnic horsemen couldn't follow them. That desperate refugee camp, born from the absolute terror of one man, would eventually evolve into the city of Venice. Think about that for a moment. One of the most beautiful, romantic cities on earth exists solely because an entire population was so petrified of Attila the Hun that they chose to live in a swamp rather than risk encountering him again.
This is the story of how a single human being became the living embodiment of the apocalypse, how a name became synonymous with the end of the world, and how a Hun earned the title that would haunt religious texts and historical records forever. Flagellum D, the Scourge of God. And I need to warn you, this story gets dark, really dark. Because to understand the power Attila wielded, you have to understand the atrocities he committed, and more disturbingly, the things people believed he was capable of doing. To understand Attila, you first have to understand the broken world he came from, a world the Romans couldn't comprehend and frankly didn't want to. The year is 406 AD, and the Roman Empire still looks impressive on maps, stretching from the gloomy forests of Britain to the burning sands of Syria. But maps lie. Behind the marble facades and the grand proclamations of the emperors, the empire is hemorrhaging from 1,000 cuts. The economy is in freefall, inflation is rampant, and corruption has become so normalized that honest governance seems like a naive dream. The borders are collapsing as Germanic tribes pour across the Rhine, fleeing something even more terrifying than Rome. Somewhere far to the east, beyond the edges of Roman knowledge, beyond the civilized world, something is stirring: the Huns. The Romans didn't understand the Huns, and that ignorance made them even more terrifying. These weren't people who lived in cities or farmed the land. They were perpetual nomads, a culture of motion and violence. Roman historians wrote about them with a mixture of fascination and horror, describing them as barely human. Here is what made them so disturbing to the classical mind. The Huns practiced cranial deformation. When a child was born, they would bind the baby's skull with tight bands, forcing the soft bones to grow in an elongated, cone-like shape. Can you imagine seeing an army of warriors, all with skulls that look alien, inhuman, like they came from another planet? This wasn't just aesthetic, this was psychological warfare before the battle even started. When Roman soldiers saw Hunnic warriors for the first time, many thought they were facing demons, actual monsters sent from hell. The Huns lived on horseback to such an extreme degree that Roman writers claimed they couldn't even walk properly. They ate, slept, and negotiated treaties while mounted. They would put raw meat under their saddles and ride all day, the pressure and heat from the horse tenderizing and curing it. By nightfall, they would eat it raw, still warm from the horse's body. They were masters of the composite bow, a weapon made of horn, wood, and sinew that could pierce Roman armor at distances the legions had never encountered. And their tactics were revolutionary. They didn't line up for honorable combat in the way the Romans understood it. They swarmed, surrounded, feigned retreats to draw enemies into ambushes, and disappeared like smoke when things turned against them. To Romans who valued order, structure, and civilization, the Huns represented chaos incarnate. Into this nightmare world, Attila was born around 406 AD. Let's talk about something the legends usually gloss over. Attila's rise to power began with a murder. In 434 AD, when the previous Hunnic leader died, power was divided between two brothers, Attila and Bleda.
For over a decade, they ruled together, launching coordinated campaigns against the Eastern Roman Empire, extracting massive tributes of gold. But here is what you need to understand about Attila. He didn't just want power. He wanted absolute, unquestioned, singular power. He wanted people to think of the Huns and see only one face, his face. Around 445 AD, Bleda died under mysterious circumstances. The historical record is suspiciously silent about the details. No battle wounds are mentioned, no illness, just gone. Most historians agree that Attila killed his own brother. Think about the cold calculation required for that decision. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a man looking at his own blood relative, someone he had ruled alongside for over a decade, and deciding he was an obstacle that needed to be removed. Did Attila poison him, have him quietly strangled, or stage a hunting accident? We will never know, and that is the point. Attila made sure we would never know. What we do know is what happened next. With Bleda gone, Attila didn't just take sole control. He transformed the Hunnic Confederation into something far more terrifying. He unified the scattered tribes under one iron will, his will. And here is where Attila showed his psychological genius. When the Roman historian Priscus visited Attila's court in 448 AD, he described a scene that is incredibly revealing. At a grand banquet, Attila's guests, kings, chieftains, Roman ambassadors, ate from silver and gold plates. They drank from jeweled goblets. They wore their finest clothes, dripping with the wealth of conquest. And Attila? He sat at the head of the table, eating plain meat from a wooden plate,
drinking from a wooden cup, wearing simple, clean clothes with no ornamentation whatsoever. Priscus noted that while everyone else laughed and celebrated, Attila's expression never changed. He didn't smile, he didn't make small talk, he just watched. This wasn't humility, this was dominance. Attila was showing everyone in that room that while they needed gold and silver and jewels to feel important, he didn't need anything. He was beyond such petty desires. He was the center of gravity around which everything else orbited. It is one of the most chilling power moves in history. And it worked. People who met Attila described feeling physically intimidated by a man who, by all accounts, was relatively short and unremarkable looking. He had a broad chest, a large head, small eyes, and a thin beard. Nothing about his physical appearance was particularly imposing, but those eyes. Everyone who met him mentioned the eyes. Priscus wrote that Attila could control people with a look, that he had a way of staring at someone that made them feel like he could see every secret they had ever kept, every lie they had ever told, every moment of weakness they had ever experienced. Imagine having that kind of presence, the kind where you could walk into a room full of warriors and kings and without saying a word, make them all afraid of you. Attila's first major target was the Eastern Roman Empire, based in Constantinople. And here is where his strategy becomes truly disturbing. The Romans had a system: pay tribute to the barbarians, keep them happy, avoid war. It was expensive, but it was cheaper than fighting. So they paid the Huns enormous amounts of gold. We're talking thousands of pounds of the stuff, just to stay away. But in 441 AD, the Eastern Empire made a fatal mistake. They missed a payment. Attila didn't send a letter of complaint. He didn't open negotiations. He unleashed hell. His army swept into the Balkans like a plague. But here is what made Attila different from other barbarian raiders. This wasn't about loot. This was about sending a message. The city of Naissus was one of the first to fall. When Attila's forces breached the walls, he gave an order that would become his signature: total annihilation. Not just military targets, everything. Contemporary accounts describe what happened next, and they are almost too horrific to believe. The Huns methodically killed every living thing in the city: men, women, children, animals. Buildings were burned, wells were poisoned.
The city was left as a monument to what happened when you crossed Attila. But here is the truly disturbing part. Years later, when Roman ambassadors passed through the area where Naissus once stood, they reported that they couldn't even approach the ruins. The stench of death was so overwhelming that the entire area was uninhabitable. They found the banks of the nearby river still covered with human bones. Let that sink in. Years later, the smell of death was still so strong you couldn't go near it. And Naissus wasn't unique. Over 70 cities suffered the same fate: Serdica, Philippopolis, Arcadiopolis, each one systematically erased. The Eastern Empire was forced to negotiate. The treaty they signed in 443 AD was one of the most humiliating in Roman history. The annual tribute was tripled. Rome had to create a demilitarized zone 5 days' journey south of the Danube. Any Roman citizen who escaped to Hunnic territory had to be returned, or Rome had to pay 8 gold coins per person as compensation. But wait, it gets worse. The treaty also included a clause that if any Hunnic noble or royal family member defected to Rome, they had to be returned immediately. But Romans who defected to the Huns, they could stay. Read that again. The Roman Empire, which once dictated terms to the entire known world, was now signing treaties that treated them as inferior to nomadic horsemen. And Attila wasn't done. In 447 AD, he returned. This time his army pushed so deep into Roman territory that they reached Thermopylae, the legendary site where 300 Spartans had once held off the Persian Empire. The symbolism was crushing. The defenders of Western civilization were being pushed back through the very gates where they had once stopped the East. The Eastern Emperor Theodosius II was forced to negotiate an even more humiliating treaty. The annual tribute was raised again. Rome had to pay all the back tribute they supposedly owed, and they had to evacuate even more territory. Christian communities throughout the Eastern Empire watched this unstoppable destruction and came to a terrifying conclusion. This wasn't a military campaign, this was divine punishment. God was using Attila to punish them for their sins. They gave him a name that would echo through eternity: Flagellum Dei, the Scourge of God, the Whip of God. And here is the truly chilling part. When Attila heard this title, he loved it. He started using it himself. He understood that if people believed he was an instrument of divine wrath, they would be too terrified to resist. Why fight against God's will? It was the ultimate psychological weapon, and Attila wielded it masterfully. By 450 AD, Attila had bled the Eastern Empire white. It was time to turn west, and his excuse for invasion is one of the strangest stories in history. Justigrada Honoria was a Roman princess, sister to the Western Emperor Valentinian III. She was also, by all accounts, miserable. She had been caught having an affair with her chamberlain, and as punishment, she was being forced into an arranged marriage to a senator, a loveless political union designed to keep her under control. In her desperation, Honoria did something extraordinary. She sent her ring to Attila the Hun with a letter begging him to help her escape the marriage. Now, a normal person might have sent a polite letter back, maybe offered some diplomatic assistance. Attila saw an opportunity. He declared that Honoria had proposed marriage to him, and as his bride, she was entitled to half of the Western Roman Empire as her dowry. Let's be clear, this was absurd. Everyone knew it was absurd. Honoria's letter was a plea for help, not a marriage proposal. But that didn't matter. Attila had his justification for war, and he was going to use it. When the Western Emperor refused, Attila mobilized the largest army he had ever assembled. Contemporary sources claim 500,000 men, though modern historians think the real number was probably between 100,000 and 200,000. Still, it was massive. In 451 AD, they crossed the Rhine into Gaul.
The campaign was devastating. City after city fell. Metz was completely destroyed, allegedly burned to the ground on Easter Sunday. Reims fell. Strasbourg fell. The Huns pushed deep into Gaul, and it looked like nothing could stop them. But here is where the story takes a turn. The Roman general Aetius, a man who had actually lived with the Huns as a hostage in his youth and understood how they fought, managed to forge an alliance with the Visigoths, two enemies united by a common threat. They met Attila's forces at the Catalonian plains in June 451 AD. The battle that followed was one of the bloodiest in ancient history. Ancient sources claim anywhere from 165,000 to 300,000 casualties, though modern historians think these numbers are exaggerated, but even conservative estimates put the death toll at over 50,000. Let me give you a sense of what this battlefield looked like. It wasn't like modern warfare with clean lines and clear objectives. This was a churning, chaotic mass of bodies, men hacking at each other with swords and axes, horses trampling the wounded. The Visigothic king Theodoric I was killed in the fighting. His body was later found trampled under the hooves of horses. The battle raged all day. As night fell, both sides were exhausted, bloodied and horrified by what they had done to each other. Attila withdrew his forces to his camp and prepared for a last stand. According to legend, he had a funeral pyre built from the saddles of horses, planning to throw himself on it rather than be captured if the Romans breached his defenses. But the attack never came. Aetius, for reasons historians still debate, didn't press the advantage. Some say he was afraid of what would happen if the Huns were completely destroyed. Better a weakened Attila than Visigoth allies who no longer needed Rome. The result was technically a draw, but strategically it was a defeat for Attila. His aura of invincibility was broken. For the first time in his career, he had been forced to retreat.
But if the Romans thought this meant Attila was finished, they were catastrophically wrong. A wounded animal is the most dangerous animal. And Attila was wounded, not in body, but in pride. In 452 AD, he invaded Italy, and this campaign was personal. Aquileia was the first major target. It was one of the richest and most fortified cities in the empire. The siege lasted 3 months, and the city's defenders were confident they could hold out indefinitely. Then one day, Attila was observing the walls when he noticed storks abandoning their nests on the city's towers, flying away with their young. To Attila, this was an omen. Even the birds knew what was coming. He ordered one final massive assault. The walls were breached, and then Attila gave the order that would define this campaign: erase it. What happened next wasn't a sacking, it was a deletion. The Huns killed systematically. Men were butchered, women and children were enslaved or killed.
Buildings were demolished stone by stone. The wealth of the city, gold, silver, precious goods, was taken. Everything else was destroyed. When they were done, Aquileia didn't exist, not as ruins, not as a ghost town. It was gone. Survivors fled into the marshes and lagoons of the Adriatic coast. They waded into the water, carrying what little they could save, and began building a new settlement on the islands. They drove wooden piles into the muddy bottom and built their homes on platforms above the water. They figured horsemen couldn't follow them there. They were right. That settlement would eventually become Venice, one of the world's most beautiful cities, born from absolute terror. But Attila wasn't finished. His army swept through northern Italy like a scythe. Padua fell, Verona fell, Milan fell. Each city brought more loot, more slaves, more terror. The Roman Emperor Valentinian III fled from Ravenna to Rome. The Senate met in an emergency session, and they realized something horrifying. Rome had no army capable of stopping Attila. The city was completely defenseless. Imagine being a Roman citizen in that moment. Your entire civilization, everything you had been taught to believe about Roman superiority and divine favor, was about to be tested by a short man from the steppes.
The city began to panic. Rich families packed their valuables and fled south. Temples filled with people praying for divine intervention. The streets buzzed with rumors. Attila would burn the city to the ground. He would enslave everyone. He would turn Rome into another Aquileia, a blank spot on the map. And then, something strange happened. With no army to defend Rome, the Senate made a desperate decision. They sent a delegation to negotiate with Attila. But they didn't send a general or a politician. They sent Pope Leo I. The two men met near the Mincio River in northern Italy, an elderly bishop in simple robes facing the scourge of God. Nobody knows exactly what was said. The meeting wasn't recorded. No transcript exists. But somehow, impossibly, Leo convinced Attila to turn around and leave Italy. Christian legend has a dramatic explanation. According to the story, as Leo spoke, Saints Peter and Paul appeared in the sky behind him, holding flaming swords, threatening Attila with divine punishment if he continued. Terrified by this heavenly vision, Attila retreated. It is a beautiful story, but historians have other theories. Here is what we know. By the time Attila reached Leo, his army was in trouble. Italy had suffered a poor harvest the year before. Food was scarce. Disease was spreading through the Hunnic camps, probably malaria from the Italian marshes. Soldiers were dying not from Roman weapons, but from starvation and fever. On top of that, Attila had just received word that the Eastern Roman Emperor had launched a counterattack across the Danube, striking at Hunnic territory while Attila was distracted in Italy. His homeland was under threat. So maybe Leo didn't perform a miracle. Maybe he just delivered some strategic intelligence along with a promise. Leave now, and Rome will pay you a massive sum of gold. Stay and watch your army disintegrate while your homeland burns. For a pragmatist like Attila, the choice might have been obvious. Or maybe, and this is the disturbing possibility, maybe Attila was playing a longer game. Maybe he understood that destroying Rome would unite the entire Christian world against him.
Whatever the truth, Attila turned his army around and left Italy. Rome was spared. Christians saw it as a miracle. Attila's reputation as an instrument of God was reinforced. Even when he showed mercy, it was because God willed it. The scourge of God had struck and then withdrawn, and somehow that made him even more terrifying. Attila never returned to Italy. In fact, he only had 1 year left to live. In 453 AD, at age 47, Attila celebrated his marriage to a young woman named Ildiko. It was another in a long line of political marriages. Attila had multiple wives, a common practice among steppe peoples to cement alliances. The wedding feast was legendary. Attila ate and drank heavily, celebrating late into the night. Eventually, he retired to his chambers with his new bride. The next morning, his attendants grew worried. Attila should have emerged by dawn. He was always an early riser. but the chamber door remained closed. They knocked. No answer. They called out. Silence. Finally, they broke down the door. Inside, they found Attila dead. Ildiko was sitting in the corner, terrified, weeping, and Attila was lying in a pool of his own blood. The official cause of death, a massive nosebleed. According to the account, Attila suffered a hemorrhage during the night, and too drunk to wake up properly, he choked on his own blood. It is one of the most anticlimactic deaths in history. The man who brought Rome to its knees, who destroyed empires, who became synonymous with the apocalypse, died from a nosebleed. Of course, murder theories have circulated for 1,500 years. Was he poisoned by Ildiko? Was she an assassin sent by Roman agents? Did someone slip something into his wine during the feast? We will never know. But here is what we do know. Attila's warriors were devastated. According to the historian Jordanes, they performed a funeral ritual so extreme it has become legendary. They cut their own faces with swords, so that the greatest of all warriors should be mourned not by the womanish tears of women, but by the blood of men. Then they held a funeral feast called Ostrava, days of drinking and celebrating Attila's life. And when they finally buried him, they went to extraordinary lengths to hide his grave. Legend says they buried him in a triple coffin, one of gold, one of silver, and one of iron. Each layer represented the treasures he had taken from the empires he destroyed. Then they buried the coffin in secret, possibly in a riverbed that was temporarily diverted.
And to ensure the location remained secret forever, they murdered every slave who dug the grave. To this day, despite countless expeditions and millions spent searching, Attila's tomb has never been found. Attila's death was the death of the Hunnic Empire. His sons, Elak, Dengisich, and Ernak tried to divide power among themselves. It was a catastrophic mistake. The empire that Attila had held together through sheer force of will immediately began to fracture. Subjugated tribes rose up in rebellion. The Battle of Nadeo in 454 AD saw Attila's own son Elak killed as Germanic tribes overthrew Hunnic dominance. Within a single year, the empire was gone. The Huns who had held the world in terror simply disappeared. They were absorbed into other tribes, scattered across the steppes, forgotten. But Attila's legacy lived on. He never conquered Rome. He never built monuments that lasted. He didn't create a civilization that endured. But in some ways, his impact was even greater than that. Attila accelerated the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Every city he destroyed weakened Rome's infrastructure. Every pound of gold he extracted drained Rome's treasury. Every humiliating treaty eroded Rome's authority, and every wave of refugees fleeing his armies crashed against Rome's borders, destabilizing everything they touched. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in 476 AD, just 23 years after Attila's death, the Huns were gone, but their shadow loomed over everything. Attila perfected something darker than conquest, the weaponization of fear. He understood that reputation could be more devastating than any army, that psychological terror could accomplish what weapons alone never could, that sometimes the threat is more powerful than the action. 1,500 years later, his name is still synonymous with destruction. When we want to describe someone as barbaric, ruthless, unstoppable, we call them Attila the Hun. He lives forever in our nightmares. And maybe that is the most disturbing part of all. The man is long dead, but the terror he created never died. It just waits in our collective memory, reminding us how fragile civilization really is, how quickly order can collapse into chaos, how one person with enough will and ruthlessness can bring the greatest empire in the world to its knees. Sleep well tonight, and remember, everything you consider permanent isn't. You have just witnessed how a single human being became the embodiment of the apocalypse. If you want more stories that expose the terrifying fragility of everything we take for granted, subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell because the next story we're uncovering goes even darker. We're diving into the Mongol Empire's punishment rituals that made Attila look merciful. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes.